The movie starts with a girl named Rain running as she tries to get away from someone. The chase soon ends up with her getting caught and buried alive, though she eventually seems to survive and get her hands out of the grave. Soon after, she's seen at a hospital where she's seriously handled by doctors who tie her up on the bed, with her parents Michelle and John trying to protest it. It turns out that Rain is a schizophrenia patient, and all she had previously experienced was only in her head. After she's tied up and sedated, the doctor informs her parents that Rain's case has become even more serious despite being on medication. Though he says it's perfectly normal, and they'd just try to monitor her since they're adamant that they don't want her to go to a psychiatric hospital. A while later, Rain wakes up and her parents meet with her. Rain finally meets with her therapist, Pangloss, who questions her about possible triggers that caused her to see a strange man even though she was just in her room. Pangloss also urges Rain to use her meds, though Rain says she doesn't feel comfortable with it as it makes her feel like a zombie. Eventually, she is discharged and they head home. As they arrive, John goes to talk to their neighbor, Danny, who also happens to be Rain's teacher in school. Michelle stays in the car, and when Rain asks her if anything is wrong, she just says things are just a little different but they'd be fine. She then walks out and goes straight into the house, with Danny coming over to tell Rain that they'd meet in class. When Rain enters the house, she goes to her room and suddenly gets flashes of how she had destroyed and scattered things in her room. John meets her there and says he'll have everything fixed and she can just sleep in the guest room for the time being. She hugs her dad and then proceeds to the other room where she spends the night. The next morning, John prepares breakfast for Rain as she's painting an image of Michelle. Since she's got to leave for school, she eventually tells her dad goodbye and that she'll be fine just as she leaves. Later on, she gets to school and just as she's clearing up her locker, her pills fall and everyone then stares at her as she picks them up. She soon manages to get to class and Danny welcomes her in. While sitting at her table, Rain scans around and sees a boy named Caleb, who is a newcomer. After class, Rain heads for lunch, and there, her old friends make fun of her condition as they also tell her not to sit with them. Feeling embarrassed, Rain goes out to eat, and while she's there, Caleb approaches her and attempts to involve her in his magic tricks. Despite hesitating and saying she doesn't like magic, she does as she's told, and Caleb's trick makes her smile when he's through. He then introduces himself and says he's just moved in. She also tells him about her, and that she's not been in school because she's been sick. Caleb then asks if they can hang out whenever she's less busy, and she says she'll let him know before leaving. When she gets home that night, Rain has quite a lot of pills to use, and after she's done taking them, she hears John on the phone with someone. When he's through, she asks what it is and he says one of his friends wants him to come and cater for an event, and he has already told his friend he can't come. Rain convinces him to go since he loves cooking, and he looks happy. That night, a small girl appears in the attic of Danny's house when Michelle comes over to see Rain. She asks Rain about her first day back at school, and Rain tells her just how it went and how she's embarrassed that the whole school looks at her differently. Rain also tells Michelle that she thinks she wants to study art in college due to her interest in painting. The next morning, Rain leaves for school, and during PE, she gets a cold response from one of her friends who she wants to walk with. As she's then walking alone, Caleb joins her and she's surprised to see him and also worried that he's missing class to be there. He says he doesn't mind, and when Rain says she doesn't feel like talking to anyone, Caleb suggests driving her around town to help clear her head. She agrees, and together, they hop into Caleb's car, which he says is still undergoing repairs. Rain is impressed to hear that he did it himself, and not long after, they have to stop by the road when the rain starts because Caleb's car's windshield wipers weren't working. They stay there for a while, and when it stops, he drives her next to her house before leaving. When she gets in, she starts drawing, and John comes to inform her that he's already leaving and he'll make sure to stay in touch with her. As soon as he leaves, Michelle comes over and asks Rain where she has been. Rain says she's been studying, but Michelle figures out that there's something more and goes on to ask if she was with a boy. Rain tells her about Caleb, though she informs Michelle that there's nothing between them. Later that night, Rain is forced to wake up from bed when she sees Danny in her attic holding onto a girl that cries for help. Rain starts trembling until John and Michelle come over and she tells them what she saw. John checks the attic and doesn't see anything, and with this, he's immediately looking terrified about Rain having another episode. He tells her to sleep and that they'll check it out the next morning, and she does, with Michelle also staying with her in bed. The next morning, John asks Rain if she's still sure of what she saw as they approach Danny's house, and she says she is. When they get to Danny's house, she welcomes them in and John tells her about what Rain saw. Danny insists that Rain must have seen or heard something else since she doesn't have any kids and it was impossible for that to happen in her house. Rain calls Danny a liar, and as Danny says she's got nothing to hide and she can take them to the attic if they wanted, Rain says she's interested. When they get to the attic, there are a lot of dolls there, and Danny confesses that it doesn't exactly look good for her, though she says the dolls were made by her grandma, and she kept them in the attic after she died, also saying she's not been up there for years. Rain continues looking around and sees several books arranged as well. As they've seen enough, John thanks Danny for answering them, after which they leave. When they get back to the house, Rain lashes out at her dad for not believing her, and she's sure that Danny is lying, especially since one of the books she saw was from a previous year despite her claim to have not been up there in a while. John looks tired of the situation and tells her to stay away from Danny's house since she could get put away if Danny reports her. The next day, Rain goes for her session with Pangloss and tells her about the little girl she saw. Pangloss is concerned about the accusations and thinks it might get her in trouble, especially since she has not been taking her meds as well. When Rain returns home, she starts preparing a meal she says is to cheer up her mom. As she also sees Michelle coming into the kitchen, Rain asks John to distract her, and he seems to block the road to stop her. The next day at school, she freaks out at lunch when she starts hearing several voices, and as she's running away, she bumps into Danny, which gets her even more terrified. When she's outside, Caleb meets her there and asks if she's okay. Rain tells him that she's hiding from the cops who are around because she thinks her neighbor called them to take her away because she knows about the little girl she's hiding in the attic. Caleb is concerned and tells her he's sure that the cops are not after her, though he asks them to meet up after school so that they can do something about it. When they're through with school, Rain checks the internet for missing kids as she waits for a while before he picks her up, and from there they head over to Danny's house. Despite Caleb not agreeing to break into the house, he follows Rain when she does. When they go in, they see a box of cereal and become suspicious as to why Danny would have it. As they still try to look for something incriminating, Danny arrives home and they have to hide in the closet as they watch her drop her things and also eat from the box of cereal. They manage to get out, though Caleb is not pleased that Rain didn't tell him her neighbor was a teacher. Rain finally goes home, and when she's in, she is startled by Michelle sneaking up on her. Michelle then asks when she'll meet Caleb, and Rain isn't pleased with the question as she thinks Michelle is trying to know whether he's real or not. Michelle apologizes, and John also watches as Rain talks to Michelle about wanting to get better and not being happy about how her condition affects her. The next day at school, Rain immediately meets Caleb as he arrives, telling him to join her in returning to Danny's house. He disagrees and just asks if they can just hang out normally. Rain agrees, and they spend most of the day enjoying the company of each other as they visit several places. Soon after, Caleb suggests helping to check for missing children in the area, and Rain says she's been checking for weeks and she's sure he won't find anything. They soon get access to a computer, and Caleb searches several pages of missing children before Rain finally sees the girl that she believes Danny kidnapped. She asks Caleb to get the contact details. While she gets something as she reaches the locker area, she sees one of her old friends crying and tries to console her but gets a cold treatment again as the girl even calls her a schizophrenia patient and says not everyone wants to be like her. Caleb is there as this happens, and after school that day, Rain tells him that he doesn't have to be friends with her if he didn't want to. Caleb says he doesn't mind, though he's bothered that she didn't tell him. They then go on for a walk and she tells him about the severity of her case. As they head home, he also tells her that it's okay if the kidnapped little girl named Malia is not real. Later that night, when she gets home, Rain covers up Michelle and tells her to try and get social instead of staying indoors always. When she meets John, he shows her to her room and she says she's not prepared to stay there yet, and that she'd still be staying in the guest room. The next day at school, Rain ignores Caleb as she tries to work on a theory to see if he's real. He notices this, and later that night, he comes through her window to meet her inside the house. As she tries to explain why she's been ignoring him, they both hear screams and believe it's from Danny's house, and it must have been Malia. Together, they head there to check. However, Caleb unknowingly shatters a glass which causes them to run, though Danny sees Rain. She immediately calls the cops, and they arrive at John's house. John is surprised to hear what happened, and Danny insists that if he doesn't get her put away to a psychiatric hospital, she'd report the case and do it for him. When he goes back in, he questions why Rain would go back to Danny's house despite his warnings, and Rain tells him that Danny is hiding something and that she saw a giant doll house in her garage, and Danny is only trying so hard to put her away because she's onto her. John disagrees and says that even though things are weird around Danny and her house, there's nothing more to it. Their argument gets heated, and he slaps Rain. He then apologizes, but she walks away, saying sorry isn't always enough. The next day, Caleb and Rain meet up, and she accuses him of leaving her and running away, though he defends himself, saying they both ran away. She also tells him of Danny's plans to report her and get her taken away. Later that day, she starts to get really terrified and disturbed by several voices in her head. That night, she texts Caleb to come over, and when he comes, she tells him that they need to act fast before Danny kills Malia. Caleb insists on coming up with a good plan before doing anything, as Danny could get them arrested. He also asks her to be calm and then attempts to show her a magic card trick. She instead takes the cards from him and asks him to pick. As he does, he kisses her, though they're interrupted by Michelle, who comes down the stairs and then has to leave them alone, saying she can see Caleb. Rain is happy about this, though Caleb suddenly looks terrified and says he's got to leave. The next day at school is terrifying for Rain, who doesn't see Caleb in school and thinks he's not real after all, or he's just ignoring her. She then gets continuously triggered throughout the day, even when Danny asks to talk to her. She also texts Caleb to ask if she did anything wrong but doesn't get a response. A night later, after she has scattered the house again, Rain texts Caleb and says she's doing something about Malia that night. Michelle tries to stop her, but Rain is not having any of it. She then walks away, and John stops her and says they've got to talk. He tells her that Michelle has been dead for 3 years and she's not real. He also says he kept it away from her when she started seeing Michelle again because Rain seemed to be calm with her around. Rain doesn't believe this and insists that he's lying, but he then tells her that he has only played along anytime she asked him to do anything for Michelle. Rain suddenly gets so furious and bothered about Malia that she says she's going over to Danny's house. John tries to stop her but trips and falls, so she heads out and makes her way in. She goes through several parts of the house and suddenly, Danny arrives and drops her key. Rain hides and continues to watch Danny as she also receives an order and goes on to prepare a meal. Rain finally moves around again and sees a door to the basement that has been locked. She manages to get the key without being seen by Danny, and after she opens it, she goes down and continues checking until she sees Malia in a cage looking scared. She tells Malia that she's there to save her, but just then Danny realizes that her keys are no longer where she kept them. She heads for the basement and checks around only to see Rain inside the cage with Malia. Danny, however, tells Rain to come out and that Malia is not real. Rain initially listens and Danny says she won't report her anymore as long as she doesn't say anything, insisting that Malia is not real. Rain suddenly looks suspicious as Danny moves towards her, and then Caleb shows up out of nowhere and attacks Danny, asking Rain to run away with Malia. Despite still trying to get a hold of Rain, Caleb does well to bring her down as they continue struggling with each other. Eventually, Rain runs out with Malia, and as she gets to the entrance, she sees John, who looks shocked and tells her that Malia is real. He takes Malia from Rain and holds onto her as well. As they walk out, Rain talks about going back to save Caleb, but John says not to worry because he's not real. However, they suddenly see an injured Caleb coming out from the back and John looks shocked, then telling Rain that he's real. The cops and medics are also around and they rescue Caleb and Malia. Rain then goes over to meet Caleb and he tells her he'd like to go on a date with her after he recovers, and she agrees. Much later, when they go to visit Michelle's grave, John and Rain catch up on how she's now doing and if she's feeling better. She tells him things are better now, and when they get back home, she tells him she's now happy to move back to her room, much to his delight. And that is how it ended. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.